Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about sieges in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and the kind of issues that hopefully Creative Assembly will be looking to fix going forward. One of the things I wish to say in this video, however, is that this video is not going to be about imagined problems that people do have, because there are things that people talk about a lot with respect to sieges that are not insignificant, but they also don't matter as much. So one of the things you may hear a lot from people is that, oh, these ladders really are bad and they should be removed from the game because they ruin sieges. There's some truth to that particular statement, but let me say it like this. When you're playing a siege battle in Warhammer 3, the last thing and the worst decision you can make as an attacker, and it's certainly a decision the AI makes, but the worst decision you can make is to actually send units on a wall via ladder, or even via siege tower if you have it. And this applies in pretty much every single Total War game that exists out there. Sometimes you may be forced to do it, but I want to be very, very clear on this. Sending units via ladders on a wall in general is a bad idea, especially if there's a determined opponent. Now over here there's not a determined opponent because there's just mostly blue horrors defending this particular settlement, so bloodletters are just gonna carve them up real nice. But most of the time you don't want to do this, because if you're sending a unit on a wall, it's gonna be isolated, or they're gonna be isolated, they're gonna be contained, they're gonna take more casualties. And if they do get routed, they are not going to escape, which is a pretty big issue. So instead, what you generally want to do is attack gates or walls, destroying them with your own artillery, so that you can force your way into the city. Now, of course, this does present other problems. One real issue with regards to the walls is that ranged units on a wall are not really effective at dealing with ranged units outside of a wall. That's because ranged units outside of a wall can concentrate their firepower better than ranged units on top of the wall or behind the wall. Yes, there is a bit of a range of advantage, but the problem is, you bring 10 units concentrated on a section of the wall, regardless of what kind of units you put here or how many units you put on this section of the wall, they're going to be wiped out by the guys standing right here. Obviously not applicable in this situation, but it is a dynamic. So that means the walls end up being kind of useless for ranged units. Now I'm not saying walls are useless, that's another myth, that walls are not particularly great. They are, but they don't confer to a defender the kind of advantage that they should have with respect to a ranged battle. Because shooting at someone from a top of the wall, or shooting at someone at the top of a wall, should not be a very easily winnable battle. It's a question of how the walls are designed, how many units you can have on it. Like if you could have, say for instance, units positioned across the entire wall, like multiple range units, facing this way for instance, that would make range units more effective. That is one problem that Creative Assembly could improve on, something that they could fix. It would respect to that. Another problem is pathfinding issues. Now this is where we can talk about ladders being a problem, or ladders being bad. See, this is why ladders are useless, because the moment you put ladders on a wall and you give units an attack order to go hit units through a gate, even if the gate is broken, even if it's controlled, chances are they're going to go up those ladders if they can to climb up the walls and get destroyed in the process. And by the way, this is a clear-cut example of why you don't want to send units on the walls and then down the bottom of the walls, because they do take, as I stated, they do take a lot of damage, and you generally don't want that to happen. There's of course the issue that gates are pretty buggy a lot of the time, so they'll open and close when they shouldn't. And there's ways you can abuse this. So say for instance you're playing as Nukari, you're besieging a settlement, you can actually create a rampage or create a behavior situation for enemy units behind that gate, as they happen here by the way, where they open the gate and your guys get in. And that is just a silly behavior. And that is absolutely something that does need to be improved on, does need to be fixed. But we go even further than the situation. So yes, right there, Be'lakor is just, you know, kind of getting killed right there. Hopefully the gate does open soon enough so I can get him out. Well, I could just fly him out. But like, for instance, take this unit of Marauders. Like, if I give them the move order to go in the city, in this case they followed it, obviously spawns will, but if I order those Marauders, instead of going through the gate, which is the easier, safer path, they'll go through those ladders. So that kind of, those kind of decisions, those kind of pathing decisions by the AI is one of the key things that does need to be improved with respect to the game. But there's more. AI behavior is one of the key issues that does need to be improved, because you might be in a situation where you're attacking a settlement and there's a lot of AI units in the garrison. AI units that would, by the way, potentially win in a field battle. Not necessarily for certain, but they could certainly give a good showing of it. But the AI will never, at any point, sally out of a settlement that's under siege when you're attacking it. Instead, they'll kind of do the worst thing. They won't even stay in a static position. Like, they won't even mass their troops on sections of the wall to try and defend them. Instead, what they will do is kind of like this dance where they'll deploy some units on the walls and gates, and then they'll put some guys behind, so they're gonna divide their forces, and because of that particular situation, they're gonna get wiped out in a siege, because they're not concentrating your forces. As an attacker, you can do so. As a player, you can do so. And it's worth pointing out, the vast majority of sieges, per Creative Assembly's own statements on the subject, the vast majority of sieges are offensive. They're not fun, they're not interesting, they're not compelling in any way, shape, or form, because you're not fighting a real battle. You're fighting against the zigzagging AI who can't decide what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. Now, beyond the problems of AI, walls, gates, pathfinding, you name them, you also have to talk about the dynamic that exists in a campaign. The most interesting battles in a campaign are field battles against legendary lords. Those are also the least common battles that you'll face in a campaign, and hilariously enough, they're the type of battles that you can auto-resolve the easiest. Whereas sieges, even against a nothing garrison like this one, are the kind of battles that are the easiest to fight manually, but the hardest to do from an auto-resolve perspective, regardless of which kind of faction you're playing. So if I auto-resolve this as Yao Ming, his first battle, I'll take a lot of casualties. If I play this manually, I'll basically take nothing. And that's a really bad dynamic. The reason this happens is because settlements have an auto-resolve benefit to it. I'm sure Creative Assembly was thinking cleverly about it, but it's not a good system because, again, a garrison is not going to be able to stand up to a legendary lord. In fact, Zhao Ming could win this battle on his own. That's just an idea, with 0 casualties. If I bring my army, maybe I'll take a couple of casualties, but I'll walk all over these guys, regardless for all the barricades, towers, pathfinding. It is not a good dynamic to force people to fight these sieges far more often than it is to force them to fight field battles. Of course, there's all kinds of discussions on the subject of auto-resolve, how it works, etc., but that is one of the chief issues that I do have with sieges in Warhammer 3. That these are the worst battles to fight in a campaign, and yet they're the most common battle you'll fight in a campaign, and they're the kind of battles that you're incentivized to deal with, or just minor settlement, or just settlements in general. Again, not a great dynamic to be dealing with. Then there's also the subject of siege equipment. Towers are useless, as I mentioned. If we had buildable ladders, not worth it. You know what you build in a siege? You build battery. So you break down a gate or multiple gates. You may bring more of them if you think the enemy is going to deal with that. Truth be told, I don't even use battering rams because you don't need to. Your lords, your heroes, etc. can break down gates fairly quickly and efficiently. The AI actually loses a lot of troops trying to break down gates with battering rams when it does so, as opposed to just using its lord to destroy those. I mean, they'll obviously send lords and units to break down gates. They'll also spend a lot of time trying to bring up their rams and siege towers and all that in a siege to the walls to attack them. Just a waste of time. The AI would do better in offensive sieges if they were doing things differently from a tactics perspective. Pharaoh introduced the idea of being able to undermine the walls, but they also made it take multiple turns. And let me tell you this, spending time playing the Interim Binary Simulator is not a great system. So I think needs to be done with siege equipment. One, we should have more siege equipment, maybe some abilities. I think Mandalore Gaming talked about this back in Warhammer 2, about like how, it would be great to build siege equipment in a siege abilities in a siege to use them. But I also think it would just be great to be able to do that instantly. Maybe you can build a ram for free, dependent on how many troops you have, but other things may cost money, or you can wait multiple turns if you just want to do everything for free. That would be a great system. So undermining, breaking a couple portions of the wall. Of course, it would depend on the army, and maybe that should always cost money, but it would also be a good money sink, and maybe it would incentivize the AI to actually attack settlements faster, because that's one of the things the AI does, by the way. It's going to spend multiple turns besieging a settlement just to build siege equipment that, by the way, it doesn't need to win a siege, and then they'll attack. Imagine if they could build stuff instantly, they would be taking settlements faster, campaigns would be more dynamic, the AI would actually be a potential threat, because I know that if they attack any of my provincial capitals, they're going to spend multiple turns. Sometimes they attack instantly if they have overwhelming force. But because of the defensive benefit settlements inherently have, and the time it takes to build siege equipment that AI is incentivized to do, you can get away with a lot of stuff in a campaign that maybe you shouldn't be able to get away with. So those are some of the things on the subject of the campaign. I would also talk about like dynamic garrisons. So what Medieval 2 did very well is that it didn't have garrisons by default. Neither Rome 1 or Medieval 2 have that. Instead, in Medieval 2, you had a couple of free slots for units, free upkeep slots for units. It depended on structures, all that, but in settlement tiers, but you could get a couple of free slots for units. You can do it for an entire army, but it was a much better and dynamic system than what you have right now. Don't get me wrong, Medieval 2's auto-resolve was not great, but that system of free upkeep slots was good. Of course, the problem in a game like Pharaoh Dynasties, which kind of has that through the outpost system, is that the AI does tend to stack a lot of stuff in those outposts, and then not build armies on the field to conquer shit. So there's obviously a lot of considerations with regards to AI, but I think that would be a much better system. Then the final thing I want to talk about here with respect to sieges is all the buildable stuff that you do have in actual settlements. So you have a number of barricades, a number of towers associated with these points. They can be destroyed and stay permanent destroyed, but the whole tower defense minigame was never a good system. It's even less incentive to take over settlement. One of the reasons you take advantage of the AI behavior where it's pulling its forces is because you don't want to go too deep in a settlement and deal with the broken pathfinding, because the AI is constantly building barricades. The barricades are really broken with regards to pathfinding. Imagine you are attacking a barricade. Okay, then there's an enemy unit behind that barricade. They can walk through their own barricade, attack the unit that's trying to destroy it, and break their pathfinding. That is not a good system. It's not a good system because it's just really, really bad combat in itself, and it's not a good system because it creates this kind of tedious pathfinding behavior you do have to deal with. So in essence, it's just not really fun to be dealing with that system whatsoever in a siege. Quite serious on that. And so you seek ways to avoid it. You seek ways to avoid getting shot by the towers, or you don't care if you're getting shot by the towers, as I don't care over here, for instance, because why would I? Xiao Ming is not going to die from a single low-level tower. Of course, we gotta talk about like the behavior of the AI with regards to a lot of these towers and how it's building cheap towers that don't really do all that much, wasting its supplies. People have mentioned this before, that it would be much better if the AI was hoarding its supplies and building a bunch of higher level towers, but it would be a better system if, well, honestly, if the towers actually matched the aesthetic of each race. That's one thing. But on top of that, it would be a much better system if towers and barricades were pre-built. So you can build a number of them before the battle, because the defender can see where the attacker is going to be deployed. And then that's it. Maybe you get more defensive supplies before the battle, but you don't get defensive supplies during the battle. You can't build anything once the battle has begun. That just would be flat out a better system to be dealing with, as opposed to the current system of towers and barricades that we currently have in the game. Just, again, not a great dynamic to be dealing with at the moment. Also, we can talk about like how a lot of these structures really screw over flying units. Like, so if you're playing dwarves with gyrocopters, or if you're playing any faction that has flying units and you're trying to move them into a city, the pathfinding with regards to flying units is especially bad. They get stuck on structures, they don't have line of sight. I understand the defensive nature of it, but there's all kinds of problems with the way your units move over structures. And like you give a move order, right? And let's say I want him to move there. Well, instead of him going up and then down, maybe he could just go down the street. So that's one problem. It does tie more into general pathfinding issues with regards to flying units, or entities within those units, like a gyrocopter unit that has 12 of them, just having different models really derping out on that specific subject. So that's something else that Creative Assembly might want to consider with regards to how they handle this situation. Again, remember, this was supposed to be a Pyrrhic victory. Sure, I have Ogre mercenaries, but I'm just being deliberate right now. With regards to just, waiting for... I'm not even attacking with Xiaoming. I'm just, like, kind of just, like, trolling with my spells and archers and all that. Hell, I didn't even need to use the artillery right there, because I could have won this without it whatsoever. Again, not a great system. Not a great design. And these are the kind of things that I would say, like with regards to barricades, with regards to AI behavior, like just dancing around, like literally they are dancing around. And worse, they're actually getting tired, so they're losing combat effectiveness. Final point has to do with morale. So if you're playing an offensive siege, or if you're playing any siege, the defender has a significant morale benefit because they maintain leadership for holding the central victory point. They shouldn't, from my view. And they shouldn't, because it just makes these sieges, which, by the way, are already very, very tedious to deal with. It makes them even more tedious. By the way, I'm trying to not win this battle too quickly, because I could have won it a while ago. But it makes these sieges tedious because you know the enemy is very unlikely to break for a long period of time. So sieges not only are the least interesting battles to be dealing with from a campaign perspective, because the challenge is not there, the interesting battle tactics are not there, etc. They're also some of the longest battles in a campaign. My hero might route there, don't care. And that in itself doesn't make things doesn't create an interesting battle gameplay, because they're long, not because the enemy stand a chance, not because they're inflicting so many casualties that they're affecting our balance of power. They're long simply because of the significant leadership benefit that the defender has. So I understand that the defender having some kind of leadership benefit makes sense, but maybe that leadership benefit should be removed at a point far more easily. Like, let's say if they take a certain number of casualties, it gets removed, so it might make sense to just prevent the complete morale shock from the moment they get attacked. but it would also make sense from my view for it to be removed after a while, because otherwise these sieges just feel like you're dealing with enemies that would have routed in a field battle on any difficulty, even with the highest possible stats. And that's, by the way, another problem. If you're playing with stat modifiers, it gets even worse, because the AI does get an inherent level of leadership on that, from that as well. So when you combine the two, these sieges end up lasting far longer than they should. That battle should have been over in 2 minutes at most. I could have done it in 2 minutes. I would have taken more casualties. Not that I took any casualties, actually. I just took a bit of damage on Xiaoming and my hero. I'm gonna be recuperated after a turn, most of it. Those are some of the issues from my perspective that I think Creative Assembly should be addressing with regards to siege updates. But I guess we'll find out what they end up doing. But I'll be as blunt as possible. Anyone who's gonna go out there and say, oh, they just need to remove ladders, I'm sorry, you're full of shit. You're full of the highest level of shit that you can imagine. And I don't care what people say on Reddit. I do care when people who are content creators who should know better, who do know better because they fight a lot of these damn things a lot themselves, they're talking about like that being one of the key issues. It's not. It's not even number 10 on the list. It's not top 100 issue. Like pathfinding issues, balancing spells that work on walls versus spells that don't work on walls, siege equipment, pathfinding towers, etc. Broken gates, those are real issues that I hope Creative Assembly resolves. Because I swear, if Creative Assembly just removes ladders and thinks that's going to change the damn thing, it won't. Now, we could talk about Siege Attacker as a trait, but just, again, incentivizing people to play the Enter and Buy-in Simulator is not a great dynamic. It can also be stated, of course, though, that a lot of people don't know how to play the game properly, because you see people with turn 100 campaigns, I'm like, why haven't you won this 50 turns ago? Seriously. Maybe people just do like playing the Enter and Buy-in Simulator, or maybe the people who post on Reddit don't represent the community in any way, shape, or form, because there's tens of thousands of people playing Total War every day, and there's maybe 1,000 people posting on Reddit and Discord constantly. Just worth saying that on the subject. Kosin, signing.